Join me in a round of applause. You know, it means a lot to Roxana to have you all here to celebrate the launch of Mud and Honey. I'm Shannon Shizaki. I'm the owner of 1016 Press. We're a publisher based in Wisconsin. And Roxana found us, and it's been a wonderful life journey, learning about your life journey through this book. And it's just an honor to meet you here in person. And thank you all for joining. We're going to have Roxana do a little reading of the book, and then I'll interview her. And if you have any questions after the interview, then we can open it up to the audience as well. So please join me again and give me a round of applause.
Before I do the reading, I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here. This is a little overwhelming to see you all. I just need a minute. I just need to soak it all in. It's really, really, really wonderful. So thank you all for being here. You know, 4.5 years ago when I started this whole, am I in the wrong spot? Oh, you're good. Okay, good.
There's people joining us virtually here.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so 4.5 years ago when I started this whole process, I think 90% of me thought, wow, you know, it would be really fun if I could put something pretty together and hand it to members of my family. And that would be just such a great accomplishment. 10% of me thought, wouldn't it be really, really cool if I had a real book that I could hold in my hands? So this is really an incredible moment, and thank you all for sharing it with me. I'm really honored to have been able to capture the story of my parents, my family's legacy. I really feel it is a story worth capturing. It's one that we can all learn from, hopefully. And it's such an honor to have been able to do this. Now the hard part, tissues. So, Of Mud and Honey, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I need those. Okay. Of Mud and Honey is the story of my family, and it's the story of my mom and dad specifically. No, I can't do this. So, some of you may know we lost my mom 2.5 weeks ago. So this is a little much to be doing so soon, but you know, she would have wanted us to move forward with it. And as sad as it is, you know, I need to focus on the blessings. And there really have been some wonderful, wonderful blessings through all of this. And, you know, one, for instance, when we knew my mom was sick, Shannon and Kaylee very graciously got a book together and got it to my parents. So mom got to hold it in her hands. I got to read it to her, which was the ultimate gift. And that is probably the greatest blessing of all. My other blessings, Jen and Michelle, this beautiful room, the flowers, the setup, the decor, I did none of it. I couldn't wrap my head around it, and Jen and Michelle did it all. So thank you so much for that. It truly is such a beautiful tribute to my mom, and she would absolutely love it, and I feel like she's here with us. Another blessing, and one of the greatest blessings, is that my mom isn't here, but my dad is here, thanks to my incredible husband and my firstborn child, who drove the 20 hours round trip to Toronto to bring Dad here. So, Dad. One of our main characters in the book, Rohin Motiwala, aka Dara Barucha in the book. If you have a moment to say hello to him and chat with him, take it. You won't regret it. What else did I have to say? Let me see. So the last 2 weeks have been a struggle, and I really have been thinking about how I could best honor my mom today. And so what I came up with and what is in the works is we'll be creating a fund in her name. And that fund, every book that's been sold thus far and every book that will be sold in the future, a portion of the proceeds will go towards research in Alzheimer's and ovarian cancer. So hopefully, my mom lived her whole life approaching every aspect of it with faith, love, and hope. And I could think of nothing better to put my faith, love, and hope in, that we can maybe find a cure for both those things. So with that, we can move forward and the worst part is done. So thank you.
Did you want to read that?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
So I'm going to read the acknowledgements from the book. I should have brought my glasses. That's okay, I think I'm good. Some of my earliest childhood memories are of my siblings and me sitting with our mother as she retold the Aiden story. It was as much a part of our upbringing as chicken curry or Lipton tea steeped with mint and for us. Her accounts of the lessons from them, some that only came to me as I wrote this book, are now forever embedded in the essence of my being. For years, we would all say how someone should document this slice of history, all of us recognizing how compelling the narrative was, but no one feeling worthy enough of the task. I still catch myself wondering if I've truly done this story its due justice. I hope that I have. I clearly remember the afternoon about 5 years ago when my mother handed me the old, tattered brown beagle-size envelope. We were, befittingly, sitting down to afternoon tea when she brought it to me. I'd expressed interest in perhaps trying to document their story, and she wasted no time in presenting me with her typed notes, handing me the envelope, the corners held firmly in each hand, the way Japanese business people hand you their business card, holding it with an unfettered trust and faith that I would do something meaningful with her pages, the pages that she had kept with her, waiting for this moment for close to 50 years. I took her envelope, unsure of what exactly I was going to do with it. It stayed buried in my bedside drawer for over a year. It was not until a move in 2018 that I pulled it out, began reading it, and then decided to try and tackle this monumental feat. After all, what did I know about writing a book? Would I write an account of what had happened? Would I take some creative license and write it as a novel? Could I even do that? In my writing of this book, I chose to take creative license where there were gaps and embellished where I felt it was needed. However, I've made every effort to accurately detail what happened from a historical perspective, especially since this time frame has not been widely documented. I relied heavily on what little is in print, but mostly from those still here to share. And as everything must come to an end, so has this endeavor of mine. I now find myself at the point in the process where I can look back and reflect on all those that helped to bring this book to print. It is the precious moment where I get to press my palms firmly together at my heart and bow deeply to those that helped make this a reality. This book would not have come together without the contributions and support of these people. I cannot say enough about everyone at 1016 Press. Shannon Ishizaki and her delightful team worked tirelessly to bring the manuscript cover and launch to fruition. I'm so grateful to Lauren Blue and Emlyn Dorneman for their exceptional editing skills, Kaylee Duntman for working with me tirelessly on the cover, Sean Malone for guiding me through the launch process so seamlessly. To the writing community of the Shit No One Tells You About Writing podcast. True, that is what they're called. Between the weekly podcast and writing retreat, I learned so much in such a very short time. But most significantly, the podcast led me to 1016 Press, and Bianca Murray's wisdom and support of my process was what any debut author can only wish for. Special thanks to my parents, Robinson Motiwala and Prochi Motiwala. My dad and I spent hours, many hours together on FaceTime during COVID lockdown. He recounted the intricacies and horrors of this period of his life for the first time since it happened. His memory for detail in his late 80s is impeccable. This book is his story, and it would not exist in any form without his dedication to its writing. What a gift it was to share this process with him and have him cheering me on the whole way. My mother is the glue that binds this book together. Her endurance, resilience, and sheer bravery is what saved these men and brought them to their eventual freedom, at no small cost to her mind or body. She is and has always been my inspiration. The timeline of this book is based on her meticulous diary entries, typed in the middle of the night in a broken typewriter that she kept hidden. I think she always knew in her heart that a book would someday exist. She's my constant reminder of the strength we all possess if we choose it. I have endless gratitude for Noel Berhoney, chairman of the British Yemeni Society, research associate at the London Middle East Institute, author and diplomat. How fortunate I am to have found him. Noel has had an extensive career as a diplomat in the Middle East. When we first came in contact with each other, we quickly realized that Noel and his wife had known my parents and socialized with them in Aden. Noel advocated through the British Embassy to help release my father and the other men. When he heard from me through another Yemen historian nearly 50 years later, he wasted no time in getting in touch. And true to his nature, he continued to help my family, this time in bringing our story to the world. His book, Yemen Divided, served as my go-to for historical accuracy, and his keen eye combed the manuscript, making sure that the timelines, people, and details were in fact accurate. To Joël and Patrice Huet, for sharing their time in Aden with me over oysters and wine in their beautiful home in Auray, France. My gratitude to them for everything that they did for my mother in those trying times is hard to articulate. They epitomize the meaning of true friendship. To Shapur Rao, who was instrumental in reaching the right people at the right time, applying political pressure for my father's release. He graciously scheduled a FaceTime call with me at an inconvenient time in India and proceeded to recount in detail the story as if it had just happened. I was awed. That day, I was given insight to a side of the story so critical to how it ended that I would never have known if it were not for him. This is a man who would stop at nothing to help his family and seek the truth. To David Ferris and Shelley Singer for their professional eye, and to Heather Sangster, my editor, who has been a lifeline through the editing and publishing process. Her attention to every little detail was mind-blowing. I owe her much gratitude for getting this to where it needed to be so that it could be shared. And I'm so grateful for the friendship that has spurned from this project. What an honor to have someone so seasoned in the industry believe so wholeheartedly in this book. David Trabulsi, Max Trabulsi, Nyla Trabulsi, and Shane Trabulsi. You all have lived this process alongside me for the last few years. Each of you have at separate moments picked me up, pushed me forward, and encouraged me to keep going. The four of you are the reason that I stuck with it and made it to the finish line. Thank you for always pushing me to be my best. To Sarosh Motiwala, Saurabh Motiwala, and Ani Sibarel, my siblings. This story is as much yours as it is Mum and Dad's. Saurabh and Ani, thank you for your continuous encouragement and appreciation. For reading the earliest versions and encouraging me to keep at it. It's come a long way since then. Sarosh, you left us too soon. You endured so much as a child during this time and subsequently from this experience. I know you're watching from above and cheering us on. I have felt your encouragement throughout the process. Thank you, Mark Campbell and Kashmira Motiwala, for finding and sharing a 20-page worn and torn letter that documented dates and details integral to the story. Special thanks to Erin Kroll, Jen Lehman, and Chris Babu. Erin, you have been my sounding board since that Carnegie lecture we attended together, and how appropriate that you came up with the ultimate title for the book. Thank you for sharing this authoring journey with me. And Jen, thank you for being the first to ever read the manuscript start to finish, with all its typos and errors and gaps. Thank you for loving it wholeheartedly, pushing me to move forward, and for introducing me to Chris Babu. I'm so fortunate to have had a seasoned author give me real advice so early in the process. To Mrs. Johnson, my 5th grade form teacher,
for introducing me to the world of creative writing and encouraging me to find my inner writer. To Mr. Fillmore, my high school English teacher, for teaching me how to find my voice, encouraging me to share that voice on paper, and teaching me how to get it all out so that it made sense. It's taken many years, but I think I'm finally starting to get it. Very special thanks to Anita Luria and Louise Norman, Aparna Verma, Beth Barry, Christy Feeney, Caitlin Weaver, Divya Krishnan, Jennifer Sullivan, Michelle Brockman, and Maya Poe for being my beta readers and the first to read the book as it is today. To Humphrey, my four-legged fur baby, for never leaving my side while I wrote. I would be nothing without the love and support from those closest to me, my dear friends and family who have cheered me on since the beginning. Michelle Brockman, Lisa Frakowitz, Jennifer Sundin, Jennifer Pinney, Donna Bennett, Charlotte Pride, Erin Kroll, Jen Lehman, Nancy Carter, Ami Chowdhury, Kate Barucha, and Jan Mears. And finally to you, thank you for picking this book up and giving it a chance. Thank you for traveling this journey with me. I hope that in sharing the story with you, you turn the final page feeling full.
You want to turn this off? The fireplace off? No? Okay. You see us okay?
Oh, yeah.
Whew. Had to come down from that video.
Yeah.
As well. So thank you for sharing all of your parent stories with us. My first question is mostly about what led you, and I know you talked about it in the acknowledgments, how your mom was like, okay, you're going to write this story. I have finally found someone to write it. Can you tell me more about that process and also how you chose to make it a biographical fiction and not just purely nonfiction?
So I think I realized, even though it's my family story, I realized how much I did not know and how there were so many pieces to this story and pieces to this puzzle that we didn't have real information about. And so it made sense to research those things and to have a little fun with it. I will say it was a lot more fun writing it as fiction because I got to learn so much about so many things that I didn't know. And
for example,
and none of this made it into the book, but it's fascinating. But I learned a lot about the Suez Canal because that is right there. And I learned all about how they dug the Suez Canal, and it was fascinating, which I never would have really thought to go. I mean, I wouldn't just be sitting there on a Friday thinking, let's go research this what's going on. But I did because of the book. And that, and then things like, Indira Gandhi is prominent in the book and played a big role in freeing my dad and my uncle and the other men. And she, depending on the author, what you read about Indira Gandhi can vary, but she was instrumental in freeing my father. And so it was important to me to capture a side of her personality that isn't necessarily always portrayed. Okay. And also, the buildings, the parliament buildings in India, in Delhi, where her offices are beautiful buildings. And I'm a little bit of a architect wannabe, so I had fun with that too. So I got to have a lot of fun with it, researching.
So how did you do your research?
Mostly Google. A lot of books. I did travel to London, and I met with Noel Berhoney, who I mentioned in the acknowledgements, who's incredible. He sent me off to the National Archives, so I did a lot of research in the National Archives. I found all the old embassy notes about my dad and his brothers and what was happening on a weekly basis at the National Archives, which was fascinating. So it was a real mix of different things.
So was there ever a part of you that always wanted to be a writer, or was this a new skill set that you had to learn?
I've always loved writing. I wouldn't say that I ever thought of myself as a writer. I've always enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. And the reason I mentioned my 5th grade English teacher is because she was very fun. And I grew up in Dubai, and I went to school in Dubai, and they weren't necessarily very progressive with writing. If they said, go take a picture and write about a picture, they meant go get a photograph at home and write about that photograph. And I went home, and my dad used to read his Time magazine, right? That you had was Time. He had like stacks of Time magazines, which my mom would get really mad because he'd never throw them away. And I went through all these Time magazines, and there was this picture of this little girl in Africa who they'd have to carry these stones on their head, and they had flat heads. And I thought, well, I want to write about that. Yeah. And I did. Yeah. And my teacher was like thrilled. And everyone else was really angry because they wrote about their birthday party and their birthday hats or whatever. And so that was, I think, when I was like, I kind of like this. This is fun. So
encouragement.
To be a little different.
Yeah. Can you tell me more about how it felt during the research process? Because I'm sure it was a lot of time talking with your dad. You said during the pandemic, and then with your mom. What was it like to try and, because in the writing, you become your mom. But what was it like during that research process to write and be her voice?
I think the greatest gift for me from this book is getting to meet my parents as people, not as my parents.
Yes.
And that was a very unique experience. My mom really, she endured so much throughout her life and never complained. Never complained. You would never, ever know. She just was the epitome of grace. And I think that, in the research process, learning that about her, it makes you want to be more like that. I don't know if I could ever be like as graceful as she was, but I will certainly try. So I don't know if I answered your question. I think I kind of rambled.
It's okay. So what was her reaction during the interview process too?
My mom had Alzheimer's, so there were some very interesting moments where we would talk about aspects of the book, and she would just remember, like we were talking about Mom and Dad's honeymoon in Africa, and Dad was telling me about the guy, and she remembered his name. And I thought, how the heck do you remember his name? That was 61 years ago. And she was like, oh, no, Kinsey, yeah, I remember his name. And he had this cute little wife. And so she was amazing. Like, there were things that both Dad and I would look at each other and go, how the heck did she do that? Mm-hmm. And then, I would say it was mostly Dad that my research came from him, and for Mom, it was whatever she had written and left and given to me. So.
Okay. And growing up, was this a part of your dinner conversations of like, oh, when we
would sit at my mom. I remember just my siblings and I very often, along with, you know, in the Middle East, you have afternoon siestas. So between 1 and 4, everything shuts down and everyone takes a nap.
Okay.
But we didn't always take a nap. Mom would lay down on her bed and we would all be sitting around and she would tell us the alien story. And she would tell us, like, there were a lot of the same stories that she would repeat and tell us over and over again. A lot of what's in the book, I didn't know. It all came through the journal.
Okay.
It came through the research. It came through talking to Dad. Because my dad never really shared his side of the story with us until so he kept it until this. So,
Yeah.
So it really was. I mean, it was very cathartic.
Yeah.
Process altogether.
Yeah. Can you describe more about how you found out about the different pieces that the parts that you made fiction? Because you had to create a scene out of nothing, like out of these people that really existed.
Yeah.
So how did you create their personalities? Was it based on reading about them, or because some of them had very strong personalities? I wonder where that came from.
So there were a few people, you're talking about the Yemeni people characters specifically. Most of it I just made up. I mean, based on what I knew was happening politically in the country.
Yeah.
I made assumptions on what these people might have been saying to each other, what their interactions most likely were. You know, I knew what some of them had done, so I had an idea of where that might go. And ultimately, it was Noel Berhoni, when he read the manuscript, for several different characters, he came back and said, yes, that's, you know, that his personality was this way, but it was more this or more that, or no, this person didn't speak any Arabic at all. I'm like, oh no, God, gotta go take that whole thing out. But
Yeah.
you know, so he really helped with legitimizing people's characters.
Yes. How did you choose to put certain words in there that aren't English? Like, I don't know, are you fluent in?
No.
No. Okay.
No. No, I don't, you know, growing up, I think, in the Middle East, and I'm not fluent in Arabic by any stretch of the imagination, but listening to it my whole life, like you kind of know where people will say something in a certain way or certain words that they will use. The Gujarati was different because I grew up in a household where my parents spoke it all the time. I never spoke it, but I understand it. So that's different. But with the Arabic, it was more intuitive. I can't say really that I knew exactly where to put. I kind of
it came out of you. Like, this seems like a appropriate part to put a word that's Arabic. Okay.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about the title? I see your colleague is here. That Erin.
Yeah,
Because
Erin.
when we first received the manuscript, it was under a different title.
It was called Colonel's Daughter, and when you read the story, you'll know why it was called The Colonel's Daughter. But I think that's also why a lot of people didn't really understand that the title is so important. I feel like it really marries with the book. It needs to. And it was Lauren who came back to me and said, you know, maybe you should think about changing the title. And it was literally the day we were moving from Pittsburgh here. And Erin was over in my empty house. I think we were sitting on the floor in the driveway. And we were sitting on the driveway, on the ground in the driveway. And we're having coffee. She brought me coffee because I didn't have coffee. And I was like, oh, you know, I got this feedback back and we should change the name. And she's like, well, do you have any ideas? I was like, I don't have one idea. I don't know. And then she scurried off for an hour and a half, and she came back. She goes, I have an idea. And I was like, you do? And she's like, I do. What about Of Mud and Honey? I'm like, I love that. And she's like, yeah. And then she's like, yeah, you know, because mud houses in Yemen and the honey. And I went back and I was like, this is the most perfect name I ever had.
I did not know that.
So it's Erin. It's all Erin. I have nothing to do with it.
That you can use so perfect. I feel like the sweetness of your mom, and then it contrasts well with the mud and the grit.
It really does. And the heritage of Yemen, I mean, it's so enrooted in the culture of Yemen, mud and honey. It made perfect sense. I mean, as soon as she said it, it just made perfect sense. It was like, this is the right name for the book. This is what it should be called. And Lauren loved it too. She was like, yes, perfect.
So I know I didn't prep you on this one, but let's talk a little bit about the cover, because I was on the inside of the publishing house of overseeing the cover designer, Kaylee, and being like, let's tweak this, let's change this. And how did it come to this? What's the significance of the pinky folding?
So in the Zoroastrian faith at the funeral, usually you will hold pinkies or a handkerchief when you're after a funeral ceremony. The body is carried up to a tower of silence, and in procession you go 2 people or 3 people, and they connect to each other to help the grieving and to support each other.
Yeah.
And you follow, and this is when my grandmother passed away, and I was maybe 14 or something, and we went to India for her. It was the only traditional Zoroastrian funeral I've ever been to. And I remember my dad explaining it to me, and it just made so much sense, like you're supporting your family and supporting people with you.
Yeah.
So that's why we talked about it with you. Really, and just the holding hands visual was harder to see. It didn't look right. So the pinkies made sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the Aiden, that's the Aiden skyline. It looks like Big Ben, but it's not Big Ben. That is, what is it?
The tower.
Aiden Tower.
Aiden Clock Tower.
Aiden Clock Tower. So it's not Big Ben. And that was actually the apartment my parents lived in was
Nearby. Yeah.
right
Oh,
close to
wow.
that there. Yeah.
Wow. Incredible.
So, and then I really wanted to have some Middle Eastern, like the filigree, the arch. I felt like that was really important to symbolize where it came from.
Well, thank you so much for answering those questions. I want to open it up to the audience and people that are joining us virtually. If you have any questions, you can type it into the computer. But if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to relay it or shout it loud.
You always have that.
Should we? Yeah. Go ahead.
What was the connection between India and Yemen? Was one of your parents from India and one from Yemen?
So both my parents are Parsi, and Parsi from India, but my father's family was born and raised in Yemen. My mom's family was born in India, but raised throughout India and Pakistan during partition because her father was in the British Indian Army. And so when they were married, my mom traveled over to Aden, and they were married and lived in Aden. So they were Parsis from India, living in Yemen, and there was a fairly large population of Parsis in Yemen at the time.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little about your writing process? Did you ever hit a block in how you were going to tell the story, and how did you go about getting around that?
Oh, so many times. Oh God. Yeah. There were many times where I didn't think I would finish. It just seemed so daunting. My writing process. So they talk about plotters and pantsers. Definitely not a plotter. I tried. I think in the beginning I thought, well, so I read this book and it said that if you're going to write a book, you need to be organized and you need to have these charts and you need to draw things out. And I tried that and it was horrible. And I had paper everywhere and I didn't know what I was doing. So I scrapped that whole thing and I just started writing. So my process is I just write and then I edit or I throw it away, or, the beginning becomes the end becomes the beginning, goes into the middle. It kind of goes all over the place.
Did you have a routine, Roxana? Did you have a routine, like a daily routine?
Initially I didn't, and the book was going very, very slowly. And then COVID hit, and I was working a part-time job, and everyone was home, and then I got laid off. But I still had that time set for work. So I said, you know what, I really should start writing again. And I used that time to write, and it was perfect because the kids were doing what they were doing. They were doing schoolwork, and David was working very loudly in the other room. Other loud phones. Those headsets really come in handy. Yeah, so that was my that's kind of where the routine began. And that's when it really started moving along. Because before that it was very slow. Very, very slow.
How long did it take from the first word that you typed to the first draft?
So I wrote The End on February 17th, 2021. And I started in July of 2018. And then there was a lot of editing after that. A lot of editing.
We have a question from the virtual.
From Arlene. Hi, Roxy. So happy for you and reads through your book. What was the most surprising thing you uncovered in your research?
Oh.
Not just the canals.
Yeah. I think really honestly, back to my parents, I think I realized, you know, you look at people and you look at the world we live in, and we live in such a fast-paced world, and we have such, you know, first world problems. And, you know, we get so worked up about things that happen in our lives and you know, oh, the drama, and it's just so terrible. And I look at what my parents went through throughout their lives, but specifically this particular experience, and the resilience that they had, and the fact that they never complained once, not once, about, you know, what happened and or how it changed their lives, how it altered their lives. They carried forth with grace, with poise, with kindness, always with kindness, and always with, no matter what, you help anyone you can help. Anyone that comes along, if they need help, you help them. And even if it hurts you to help them, you help them. And that, I think that's the biggest lesson I took away from.
What do you think motivated your parents to have that kind of nurturing kindness to the core?
They're just inherently good people, I think. And I think, you know, it comes from their families and from their parents. And, you know, I do feel it's a choice as well. And this is how they chose to be. And, you know, I hope that's been imparted on me. I hope I try to live my life the same way. It's not easy. And, you know, it's really remarkable to know two people and to be able to call them your parents that are that graceful.
When people read this book, what do you hope that they take away from it? Is it a part of that upbringing that you learned from?
You know, I think the one thing I'd like people to take away from it is just to have hope. You know, I faith, love, and hope. It was the pillar. Those were the pillars of my mother. I think it's how she raised us. It's what she wanted to put forth into the world, and I just hope that everyone takes a little bit of that away from the book as well.
If there aren't any other questions, I'd like to invite right now Roxana to come to the book signing table. And if you have purchased a book, you can stand in line and she can sign it. And if you haven't purchased a book, you can go back outside and buy some. But join me again in giving her a